Hi, everyone. We have a delightful show for you today, and one that's a little bit different because many of you may feel that you have been in the situation that my guest will be talking about today. And my guest is, of course, Beth Sears. However, not everybody comes from the loving background that I did. I mean, I was very lucky to have the mom and dad I did. They were very, very supportive of everything, very disciplined, but again, very strict, but still, they were very loving. And Beth says that she grew up in a home where she felt like she never mattered. She had hardworking parents that gave them her more than they received as kids, but nonetheless, she felt that she just didn't matter. And she found her role in her family. Uh, the way to get attention was to be a family clown, but she was not taken very seriously. So she had serious issues and an eating disorder and a very low self worth that held her back. And had she not quit nursing school, she probably would have flunked out. And she says it wasn't until got married and got some help with her feelings of insecurity that she was able to put that behind herself and grow. The interesting thing is where she is now. And that's a very important thing because I know so many people, and I know many of you do too, who use what happened to them in the past as an excuse. Well, this is because this happened and this. And I remember one time I was giving a speech and a woman said something to me about her mother and her mother controlled this and that. And I said to her, is your mother still living? And she said, no. I said, well, how long ago did she pass away? And she told me 30 years. And for 30 years, that mother had been controlling her life, not allowing her to do certain things. That is ridiculous. So let me tell you about Beth today. She feels great about herself, about what she's accomplished, and she continues to work on personal growth. She runs a company that's called Workplace Communication. She's finished a PhD after age 50, mind you, and started her business at 58. So no excuses for any of you out there who are saying, oh, I'm 50, I'm too old, I can't do this. She facilitates a women's group at her church with the goal of helping others to grow spiritually. She feels grounded and works on balance by taking every Friday off to spend with her husband and time off to spend with her grandchildren. Now, folks, if you don't want to hear from somebody like that, I don't know what you want to do, because Beth is a perfect model of someone who had all kinds of issues when she was young and blossomed great after 50. So welcome to the show, Beth.
Oh, thank you, Gayle. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on your show.
Well, thank you. And I just think you're a great example of who women should look up to. If anybody is growing up with the feeling I'm not enough, no one loves me, I need to do all of this on my own, but I'm not worthy of it, what would you say transformed you? I mean, why and how did you blossom at a later age?
I think the biggest thing that really helped me to make a change was awareness. Awareness of how I was feeling, where I was at. I wasn't happy. Although I had this perfect smile that I wore all the time, I wore this mask tightly. And I think I just got to the point where I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And just decided that it was time to do something different.
Yeah, that takes a lot of guts, though. I mean, especially when you had lived your life the way you had lived it. I mean, and going back to school, I think I got my doctorate. I can't even remember anymore, but I think I must have been around 40 or, my early 40s. But you did it after age 50, and then you started a business at 58. Now, I've started businesses later than that, but I had been in business early. I started my first business when I was 21. So you started out as a nurse, and we know you didn't complete that, But how did you end up as a consultant where you were helping leaders transform their organizations?
Well, quite truthfully, I did start out my entire life. I thought I wanted to be a nurse. So I went to nursing school out of high school. And then this Marine on a white horse came along.
Oh, I love those white horses, Beth. I love those white horses.
And to tell you a little bit about the challenges that I'm sure you, Gayle, and other women of my age have faced, the nursing school I went to, we had to get their permission to get married.
No, I understand that. When I was in college, you could not get married without the college president okaying it. I mean, I know that sounds bizarre to young women today, but I remember my classmate left school because she wanted to get married to another classmate, and it was not allowed.
Absolutely. And so we didn't want to wait 3 years. So I quit school, that nursing school, with the intention of getting married and then returning to nursing school. But my husband was just home from Vietnam, and we were both trying to go to school at the same time and balance 2 kids. And then we had a baby, and it was just too much. So I said to him, "You're on the GI Bill. You have a time constraint. Why don't you finish school? And then in a year when you're complete, I'll go back and I'll finish nursing school." So that's what I did. And initially I was waitressing 3 jobs trying to support the family.
Okay, now let's stop there for just a minute, Beth.
Sure.
This is important for everybody to hear. And I know this is a program for women 50 plus, but if any of you 50 plusers out there have kids who are complaining because they don't have enough money, you know, we all, Beth and I, grew up in a time where you did what it took. And if it took 3 jobs to make your money, that's what you did. You didn't expect a handout. And many of us, we're the problem, many of us have raised kids that expect a handout. And I don't think there's anything wrong with helping your kids if you can, but they also need to learn responsibility and know that there is a certain thing that they have to pay for as well. So go ahead. You have these 3 waitressing jobs.
Yes, and I truly agree with you. The generational differences is something that I teach, and I tell the leaders, I say, that are so frustrated with younger people, don't blame them. We created them.
That's right.
Exactly what you said. So I was working these 3 jobs, and a neighbor said something to me about running around like a chicken with my head cut off. He goes, "Why don't you go to General Motors?" And I said, "And do what?" He said, "Work in the factory." And I said, "No, that's not something I want to do." And then he threw his paycheck on the table. And at the time I was making $1.15 an hour waitressing, and his paycheck was $278.16. Not that it made an impression. And so I immediately went to GM and got hired. And you want to see how hiring has changed. I called at noon. They said, "Be there by 2. I went through an interview, a physical, got my pass, and I started at 10:35 that night.
My golly. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So the plan.
But evidently there was not discrimination against women then.
They were looking for, I had everything they were looking for, hands, and I could work, period. They were hiring so many people, they could have cared less if I had a head.
Well, as long as I had. That's changed too. I mean, just the fact of what the needs are today and who they're willing to hire. Interesting. Okay.
Absolutely.
So you went to work there. Okay.
And I was working on the line, and I looked around and I noticed the setup guy who was putting parts on the line and fixing machines. Well, I grew up on a farm. So I went to them and I said, I'd like to be considered for backup setup when Larry's out. And they looked at me and they said, "You're a girl." And I said, "Yes." I said, I can do the work, though, very observant. And when the next time Larry was out, they put a guy in his place. And I went to them and I said, "Listen, this is seniority based. I have more time than him. I want that job." And I got it. And so I did backup setup when the regular setup guy was there, and did a great job at it and got recognized for it. And then they were looking for facilitators for change, organizational change. And I'm going to be honest, Gayle, I had no clue what that meant, but I knew it was more interesting than what I was doing. And that started my journey that ended 30 years later. They did a terrific job of not only supporting me as I went back to school, but training me so that I understood how to help organizations evolve. And it's stuff I'm using in my life today. So it really was a gift to me, but I ended up being at General Motors for 30 years.
Wow. First of all, I don't think anybody's at General Motors anymore for 30 years, but that's a whole other discussion. But you also did something that maybe, I don't know if it was foreign to you then, because you said you woke up later, but you were assertive. You went and you stood up for yourself and you said, I can do the job and I want that opportunity. And that took guts. And I think that that's very important. And that's, again, a characteristic that maybe women as they age, they learn how to do it better, although some people do not. And that is, you've got to speak up for yourself. Women do not necessarily speak up for themselves. They don't necessarily say, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to go after, and go up to somebody and say, I can do this and I want the opportunity. And whereas they'll just pout and say, oh, I was passed over, nobody knows anything about me. That was just, well, he was hired because he was a man. And all of those things may be true,
Yes.
but you have to speak up for yourself. So do you think that was the first thing you did to turn your life around, or was there something else?
I don't think so. And I think if I'm totally honest with myself, I was more aggressive than I was assertive. And as you said, as we age, we learn better ways to do it. And I think today I would have still stuck up for myself, but I would have done it in a little different manner than I did back then. But I don't think that was something that I was a fighter. So that's something I would do, even though I wasn't as emotionally stable as I could have been. And by that, I mean, I just always was a perfectionist and wanted to do everything perfect. And so I don't think that was the turning point in my life. I really think it came a little later, but not that much later, maybe 3 years later, in the early 80s, I'd say.
So again, for our listeners, I just want to give you my differentiation between being assertive and aggressive. When you are assertive, it means you believe you have the right to state your thoughts, feelings, and opinions without hurting anyone else in the process. Being aggressive means you believe you have the right to state your thoughts, feelings, and opinions without caring about anybody else's. So the difference is the hostility that you have in what you say and how you say it. So I'm glad that you've learned a more assertive approach. So in that realm, how have your relationships improved, and what did it take to make that happen?
Oh, totally different, especially my husband and I. We had struggles, as many young couples do, but we were in pretty rough shape. And the fact that we've been together for 47 years is really a miracle. I blogged for our local newspaper, and we used to go out for our anniversary, and people kept asking, what is it that you have done that has turned your relationship around? So I wrote a blog, From Train Wreck to Treasured Love. And in it, I said, we quit pointing fingers and we started using a mirror, and we started looking at ourselves and deciding what we could do differently that would improve our relationship. And I do that in all relationships in my life. Whereas when something's going wrong, it's so easy to blame another person, but then you give all your power away to do anything different. So if you take a look at yourself and decide to change how you choose to interact with the person, the other person has to make some choices. If you think about the analogy of a dance and you change your dance, the other person has to decide whether they want to continue dancing or quit dancing or just do something different. So that's what I did and we did to create just a wonderful, loving, trusting relationship that I'm very proud of. And so is he.
Well, my husband and I were married for 45 years before he passed away. In fact, it would be almost 55 years now because he'll be gone almost 10 years. And we were as different as you could possibly imagine. But there were certain things that we had in common. I mean, we had certain values, certain morals, that kind of thing. And we just had a great time together. I mean, we just really had fun together. Do you think that couples who go through this, because you hear about couples that are married 25 and 30 years and then they get a divorce. They say because they want to stay together for the kids, but it's been proven that actually if you're not having a great relationship, you shouldn't stay there for the kids because they see all of the hostility that's there. What do you think about couples going to counseling and things like that? Was that something you went through or
absolutely.
You did go to counseling.
Oh, absolutely. Another piece that I didn't say earlier was, like I said, I had issues. I was in recovery from an eating disorder. And that was the first counseling I went to initially on my own. Again, it was the perfectionism, not good enough, and trying to be perfect that led me to that behavior. So I went for counseling. But then when Don and I were having so many troubles, he said he wasn't willing to go for counseling. And I said, fine, I'm going to go alone. So then I went alone. And a couple weeks later, he came with me. And it really helped us to peel back the layers and really use that mirror a little more. I can remember one of my biggest complaints about my husband was he never communicated. He didn't talk. So one of the first times we went to the marriage relationship counselor, the counselor asked how he was, and I answered. And the counselor said, thank you so much. I asked him. And it was a real awareness that the thing I was complaining about him, I wasn't allowing him to talk. So counseling was a gift. And I tell people all the time, it was a gift I gave myself that was really transformative and something I suggest to anybody and everybody who just wants another opinion to help them hold up the mirror to you and help you understand what you might be doing that's not helpful.
Well, I think it's interesting that you went alone because many times counselors won't see you alone. They only want to treat couples. They don't want to treat one person without the other. And men would have a difficult time going to a therapist and talking to them. I mean, that's not one of their favorite things to do. And so I was very commendable of Don to say, okay, I'll go with you. What was the change for him? What made him go with you?
I don't know. I think he knew we were in real trouble. And even though, we were close to splitting up, we always loved one another. And I think that was the thing that just, he would do anything and I would do anything to really help us. And that's when I talk to people who have been married 30 years or 40 years and get divorced. It's because both people aren't willing to work at it and hold up the mirror. And one person can't do it alone.
No, it's true. It's very true. And I think that, there has to be that commitment on both ends. So those of you listening here, you can see, nothing is solved easily. It takes work, whatever it is that you're interested in, whether it's your business, your career, your marriage, your family, everything takes work. Nothing is automatically perfect all the time. So you also say that you practice gratitude, and that's been very, very helpful. How has that helped, and how did you learn to practice gratitude?
Well, I think it's spiritually from our church. They speak a lot about gratitude, but I think if it comes to terms to my personal life and being aware of what I have going for me, you look around. And so I'll see somebody limping along and I'll just be very grateful for my legs that hold me. so strongly, and different things like that. It's just acknowledging what you have going in a relationship, be it with Don or my assistant or anybody else. I pay attention. I thank him for the things he does. I'm grateful, but there's so often that they're just there and they're just doing things. And he'll say to me, "You're such a good cook. You just whipped this up. Thank you so much." And he'll bring wood in for the fire because we're in the middle of a cold chill up here. And I'll say, "Thanks. I so appreciate you doing that." So it's just about acknowledging what the other person does and how grateful you are for them and for your circumstances, because there is always somebody worse off.
Yeah, it is interesting when you realize how many times you could say thank you, or I appreciate you, or that was a wonderful thing that you did, and we just don't take the time to say it, which is sad. It's really sad. And I know that being grateful for what you have, it's like that old saying, what you worry about not having any shoes until you see the man who doesn't have any legs. It's
Right.
it's the same thing. I mean, it's just being, whatever your circumstances are, there are always people in worse situations than you are. And you just can't harp on that. You've got to figure out how to get around it, how to get through it. And I think that's very important. And I do think when we talk about the millennials, in terms of what they expect, one of the things I do think that they are good at is they do show gratitude, and they are grateful, and they do want to have meaning in the things that they do. So I think that's one of the positive things. I mean, they're very much into social causes and so forth. Well, I hope you've been enjoying this. My conversation with Beth Sears. She is the CEO of Workplace Communications, and it is her slogan is "Good enough to great coaching." Good enough to great coaching, and she's full of all kinds of wisdom, because she came from a situation where she didn't feel that she was appreciated or that she did things the way that were expected. And then she went on to really be hard on herself, and look at what she did after reaching 50. Got her doctorate, started her business. I mean, just all kinds of wonderful things. So one of the questions that I think we'll talk about when we come back is about retirement. Because again, when you start a business at 58, when are you going to retire? That's a question I get a lot of. And, it's one thing to start a business when you're 30 or 35, and you usually have a plan. But when you start a business after 50, there's a lot that goes into that in terms of, am I going to retire? Am I going to sell the business? Am I going to leave it to one of my kids? Are they really interested? Just a whole bunch of things that get involved in that. So I think that's something we need to really pay attention to. So we'll be back in a little while. We have two parts to this show, and we're just getting to know Beth. And I think that you will find her answers in terms of her business, which we'll talk about in the second part, very interesting, because I know there are some of you sitting out there saying, I don't know if I want to start a business at this age. I'm just now getting settled, and the kids are out of the house, and I want to spend the time with my grandkids, and I want to travel, and I want to do all of these wonderful things. So stay tuned. We'll be back with Beth Sears, and we'll talk to you in a few minutes.